reasons, but there's obviously a disconnect there.
I ask you just to amplify that. The central bank report spoke about the Irish economy, that most of the risk from the economy was coming from external factors, the possibility of Brexit and things like that, but it said here things are working well. What would you like to see on the question of commercial property? What would you like to see the central bank do as opposed to say?
Just give straightforward instructions and say, look, we're going to cap the amount you can lend on this, or put very, very strict criteria on it, and stick to them. Because, I mean, the banks, this is kind of, loose regulation coming in again. Quite obviously, if you get a situation where the banks are not actually heeding warnings from the central bank, you're going to have to introduce strict measures if they're not doing it. This is not learning the lessons of the past at all. And the other thing, which addresses one of the subjects which you just mentioned, and that's the warnings and the reasons, and the fact they come from the threat comes from external places. The big danger, which I suppose people haven't recognised, and I think it's mentioned in the central bank report today, is the possibility of a rise in US interest rates. And we're back at the level where interest rates are at an incredibly low level. What happens if interest rates go up, which they are almost inevitably going to do, and that could be absolutely catastrophic for the current debt, let alone for any future debt.
Okay, well that might be in the 2 to 3 year horizon, but just bringing it back to today, can I ask you, Eamon Ryan, to give your assessment of what you heard from the Environment Minister today in his instructions to the Dublin local authorities when it came to the question of conditionality and delivering the amount of residential houses which are required, as we heard from Hubert as well?
I thought it was a disgraceful letter. I think we seem to have learned absolutely nothing from the past. And for the Minister to kind of coming out saying, whatever you do, don't improve building standards for fear it might affect commercial interests and so on, goes right back to that early period, 2000s, when we continued using hollow blocks, and we're paying terribly for the price of that now. It goes back to just that continued kind of, that's the way to get supply going. There are other ways we can get supply going, but lowering building standards is not the one. Our stopping and rising building standards shouldn't be one of them. And I think particularly for the householder, I have an auctioneer as well as a deputy beside me, I have a builder. But
Resigned actually, I resigned, yeah.
Sorry,
yeah. Okay, what about money back?
Represent the householder or the purchaser of property. Better building standards do save you money. The price is set in the market for selling property. If you have higher standards, yes, builders have to meet them, and there's certain difficulty adapting to that, but it's a level playing field. It's a fair kind of fight, as it were, towards who can do it best. But the householder doesn't pay more because of higher standards. The householder pays the market rate and then gets the benefits and savings in lower water charges, lower energy bills, lower maintenance bills over the subsequent 20, 30 years of the house. So for him to go back to the kind of bad old days of whatever you do, don't improve building standards, was incredible.
But we hear from urgent. Sorry, just to develop it on, if you just from the Minister is here, so we might as well take on the mantle of Alan Kelly, sometimes known as AK-47 in the Department of the Environment. There is an urgent need for housing. We also have a dilemma over the question of rents. He's fighting against increasing rent supplement because he thinks we'll add to the spiral. The answer, therefore, is higher output and quickly. This is what's going to be achieved.
What I would say to the Minister, let's pretend you're the Minister. He came into government at a time when the previous government had set up in place a system for site value taxation that was ready to go, and in their own Fine Gael and Labour programme for government, they agreed that's the way they wanted to go, but they pulled out of it a year or two later and ended up with a straight plain vanilla property tax to get as much revenue as possible. If we'd had such a site value taxation system in place, it would provide an incentive for developers who have land to make sure that it's used quickly. And they didn't do that, which was one of the fundamental mistakes they made. And I think it's interesting that the Minister's own conference, the Labour Party, in their conference last year, realised they made a mistake and said, oh, now we're in favour of site value tax. Well, they want to get on with it, because they've only a year left in government, or less than that.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the ways they could have increased supply. Again, in a fair, across the board, treat everyone the same way. So I think you could do it different ways. Not getting better building standards ain't the clever way of doing it.
I'll come back to you, Shane, in 1 minute. I just want to hand back to you, Hubert.
Well, the Department of the Environment has continuously increased the standards over the last number of years, and the industry has acted proactively and worked with the Department in the introduction of those standards. And I might even refer back to the Building Control Amendment Regulations 2014 that were introduced with effect from March last year. that actually provided for a much greater level of oversight to be applied to the entire building process. It obliged, owners to appoint competent builders, to appoint, designers that are professional and able to design the properties, to appoint assigned certifiers who are chartered engineers, building surveyors, or registered architects. And the industry has certainly welcomed that initiative. They've proactively worked with it. They've worked with the Department of the Environment, and the industry, I would say, is fully supportive of improved standards. The issue at stake is where some local authorities will decide themselves to up the standards over and above the department standards. I suppose without the required impact assessment being undertaken as to what that will have with regard to the industry, we need a national standard setting body where you have consistency in standards applied across the board. And I believe that the Department of the Environment role has to be recognised in this front. It brings greater clarity, it brings consistency, it's fully costed. And the last thing the industry needs is different local authorities determining different standards, which can sometimes conflict with the department's technical guidance documents under the building regulations. So we need to ensure that when somebody is certifying compliance, that they know they're certifying compliance in accordance with the appropriate statutory instrument and the technical guidance documents published by the department.
Hubert, I wouldn't disagree with anything you said there, but one thing I would point out, this recent increase in standards, and it has been done well, and I think the CIF and others have acted very well in it, that was introduced back in 2006 in two councils, in Fingal and in Dún Laoghaire, because Green Party councillors and those councils were really pushing it. And so there was a and I have to say at the time, huge opposition from the RIAI and other interests that I was amazed at that they couldn't see that better standards were needed. But so we have a precedent where we have in certain councils taking a lead, showing what's possible. Yes, you have to get it right, and yes, you have to make sure that the building sector can actually work with it. But for the minister to write and say, whatever you do, don't raise any standards to councils in across the board fiat is not the clear.
But I think the big fear is that if councils suddenly decide they want to increase the standards of a particular date, it could have an impact on supply when it's not thought through. There's nothing to stop the local authority determining revised standards for its own development, even on a trial basis, to ensure that it actually works, and we'd fully support that. But make sure you don't do something that's actually going to put an impediment to increased supply at the current time, while the department may already be looking at standards that should be increased.
Yeah, I think I agree with Eamon. Yeah, I think that this is deregulation, which is dangerous, and I think removing standards here is quite obviously the timing of it is for one purpose alone. It's populist, which is not necessarily always wrong, but it's populist, but it's an election coming. It's populist to send the signal, this clear signal to people that houses are going to be available. He's not going to be the person standing in the way. But these houses, as everybody in this room will know, are meant to last 100, 150 years or more. And to say, okay, standards can actually be relaxed a bit now, suddenly, when they've got to last for a very, very long time, I think is wrong. I think the ministers should be encouraging and imposing the highest possible standards.
But isn't that what Hubert's saying? He's saying it isn't being lessened. What he's trying to do is prevent one local authority doing one thing, another local authority doing another, and making it difficult for the industry to try and deliver on the targets as quickly as possible.
That's not the message I get. The message I get is, look, there's certain standards which you don't have to keep to, and which we won't impose. They may be very strict, but the differential may be eliminated, but then you're going to get to the lowest common denominator if you do that. And the message I get is quite clearly that there must be houses built at all cost. That's an electoral message. That won't matter in 8 months or a year's time, and it's unfortunate it comes to this time, but that's what the minister's prerogative is. I worry about ministers having these sort of powers over local authorities at this time in the electoral cycle. I worry about them having these powers at all, because what they can do is send a message to people that are going to get houses more easily, which they will, and which they'll seize the opportunity, because housing is the most important thing in their lives, but which they'll pay for down the road.
Okay, it's open to political influence, and that's a concern when an election could be held as closely as November.
Well, the department is the national standard setting body, and what we're hearing about now is not a relaxation of any of those standards. In fact, those standards are being maintained. There is an issue under the Building Control Amendment Regulations 2014, whereby the Minister is concerned at the overall cost of the assigned certifiers and the inspection processes, and he launched a consultation process in relation to that a number of weeks ago. Now, as an industry, we went back to the Minister and we said, we don't believe there should be any relaxation of those requirements. We fully supported the retention of the role of the assigned certifier, that all these properties must be inspected during the construction process, and that there must be sign-off at completion. And that has been the industry response to the Minister on that front. And I would certainly hope that those building control amendments regulations 2014 are not relaxed. I know the concern relates to the one-off house and the individual houses, but there should be one standard applicable across the board, that it is properly designed, it is properly supervised and signed off, and that it cannot be occupied until it's certified as being compliant and full with the building regulations.
I just point out that we've had some pretty big disasters in building standards being fallen, as you know, very high profile ones, and that it's absolutely imperative that those don't happen again in the long-term interest of people who live in those places. And if there is any relaxation in standards, there is a danger of that. There is a danger of that happening. That's what I'd be worried about.
We're going to open it out onto the floor in a minute, so if you had a question, just consider it and raise. We've got a roving mic which we'll be able to bring to you. But Eamon, how confident are you that things are going to be developed in a sustainable manner as opposed to the sustained development which we saw, which drove us off a cliff?
I think we still have a real problem in the planning side. We don't have a national planning strategy. We don't have clear direction as to where we need to build. In my mind, that has to be in the centre of our main cities, and we have a particular issue in Dublin because there is going to be an inevitable increase in the population of Dublin. I think the work that Lord Conser has done showing some of the demographic trends, and I don't see the clear signals yet to make sure that the development takes place close to the centre in metropolitan areas. I also, and I suppose it's just like a wider broadening out how I think we haven't seemed to learn the lessons from the past. I think there's a real concern at what the Fiscal Advisory Council said last week, that the broad budget position to take by the government is very similar to the position taken in the early part of the 2000s, where we had 10 years of low tax and high spend. And that's what the Fiscal Advisory Council seemed to me saying again, is what we're heading back to. And I suppose, and last but not least, I mean, I think the really interesting thing is around the finance side. Our banks are not going to go back to the same size that they were. The question then is, where can we get the financing to make sure the development happens quickly? And there'll be a certain amount of international finance, a lot of those big NAM assets down the Docklands going to get built because they're coming with their capital. But for an Irish construction industry, where the capital is going to come from, I think is probably the biggest and most important question, and that, more than what the Minister does in building regulations, is going to determine how we get supply. And I think there are creative solutions. I think what the National Economic and Social Council said around changing the whole social housing model towards a cost rental model is one of the right ways to go, and I think financing that through a guaranteed income stream is one of the ways we could do it. It's off government balance sheet, it is financeable. So I think that's probably going to be the key issue as to whether we go back to a sustainable path or not. Shane?
Yeah, I think the construction industry is obviously a good weather vane of the feel-good factor, and it is one of the first beneficiaries in many ways. We see a crane in Leicester House at the moment for the first time for many years, and that's most encouraging. But I think, I'm not saying there's a full storm, because obviously certain elements of the economy are picking up enormously, but what Eamon referred to there, I kind of echo as a bit of a warning that the Financial Advisory Council last week issued what is a little covered report. I mean, there were other things in the media which occupied people elsewhere, but what they were really saying was that the government is fiddling the figures. There's no doubt that's what they were saying. They were saying, look, it's all very well to say what you've got up to this budget, and what you project for next year, and your spending for next year, and all the ratios to GDP and all that stuff. But they said the tax rate, you're not taking into account the tax reductions which you promised, and you're not taking into account the spending which you promised. Well, if you don't take those two things into account, I don't think your figures matter at all. So the feel-good factor could be shattered very, very shortly by an external shock, which is referred to in the central bank report today. And that would have, obviously, an immediate effect on house building and the construction industry. And I think, you know, it's not necessarily a full storm because things are better, but I wouldn't take it for granted that we're on an upward curve which is going to be uninterrupted at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, Finance Minister Michael Noonan said he did take on board what the Fiscal had said, as well as some of the other bodies who were advising him, and talked about the progress of the government, and they weren't going to jettison it for short-term political need. Do you have confidence in the approach that the government is taking on this matter? Are you two also got concerns?
I suppose the whole funding model for construction is entirely different from what it was a number of years ago, and certainly it had to change. But by and large now, if you want to pursue a development, you'd be looking if you can get development finance from the bank for about 60%, and the rest must be raised by equity. And the cost of that equity then is very significant. It can be in the high teen figures. And by and large, there are, with the current values, that may make a project unviable. There's also other issues where you want to open up large greenfield areas that are zoned for development, and there's significant infrastructure required. If you spend the money in infrastructure, that might not be paid back for maybe 5, 6, 7 or 8 years. And by and large, the funding model will not support long-term funding of that nature. So we have major issues to contend with, and we have to ensure that the required equity is in place in order to fund it. And by and large, the banking sector will fund developments that are shovel ready and where the money can come back within generally a 2-year period. Now that will deal with the Greater Dublin area, and some equity funds are prepared to fund in the Greater Dublin area. But one other problem then coming down the tracks is that as demand does recover in some of the key regional areas, there may be less of an appetite from some of the equity funders to actually part fund that development. And I don't know what's going to happen there, but that actually will cause problems in the not too distant future in those key regional areas where sustainable demand will arise.
We'll just check if there's anyone on the floor who wanted to ask our panel any questions. Yep.
Hi, I work for consulting engineers, and I've often got to do research into upcoming projects and for property developers that are interested in sites that are for sale and so on. And for example, recently I had to try and find out about the sewage situation in a particular county council area. I contacted them, they sent me to the Irish Water Authority, who sent me back to them, and so on and so on. That's just one instance of the building process where it's impossible to get information and people just pass you backwards and forwards. I think in this is one of the cases where the Department of the Environment has to bite the bullet and say, these people are in charge and these are the people handing out information. If you're lucky enough to get the information and act on it and be building something, then you find that every single county council, as you said, has completely different authorities, different forms, different everything. In London, for example, if you want to build something, a building inspector has to come out and sign it off before you can build it. Here, it's impossible to, there's no overall control, there's no overall information process, there's no overall standard way of doing things, which in a country of this size is ridiculous. If they can do it in a city the size of London, which the population is twice the size of this country, then they can do it here. And why has this not happened, and will it ever happen? That's what I'd like to know.
Okay, let's get Hubert to start.
Okay, we have articulated our concerns to Irish Water, and we would like to see a standardisation approach across the country. And I am aware that Irish Water are now working on standard construction details that will apply in respective services and so on. There's still a lot of work to be done by Irish Water, and I think they're also constrained by the fact that the regulator has not yet published the proposed connections policy, and that in turn would influence the standard charging that will apply countrywide. Regrettably, it is taking time, but I'd hope that they would get it right over the coming 12 to 18 months and streamline it, because I fully agree with you. It is quite frustrating. It's quite frustrating for anyone who wants to pursue a particular development, because they really have to know their way around each local authority and know the way around the various other infrastructure providers to ensure that these anomalies can actually be addressed.
Irish Water goes into Leinster House every few months. Have you gone to those meetings? Have this instilled you with an awful lot of confidence in the way forward, Shane?
I haven't gone to any of those meetings, I must say, but I must say that I find it easy to ring them up and talk to them, because I think these are public relations exercises by them. And most of those who have been to them have not been particularly impressed or reassured by what's happened.
Any other questions from the floor? Yeah, just over by the balcony.
Bought the assets that they had to deal with that we call it Celtic Tiger developers. But if you want to get supply, if you want to get the infrastructure, you'll have to embrace the people who have the skills and the competency. And they are the developers who built the Celtic Tiger. And they are being excluded because they are like RIS in relation to NAMA. They will not deal with them. If I own a site, and I am a client of NAMA, if I own a site, anybody who deals with that site have to get a sworn statement that they have no connection with that developer. So the people who know those sites better than anybody, who can deliver through the planning process, who have the competency to build, they are these excluded builders. And I think we should need to draw a line and say we've come from where we come from, and if we want to move on and provide houses for our kids who are waiting in Perth in Australia or Boston, New York, they will come home and they will be our future. So sometimes we just have to draw a line and get on with it.
Well, that is the big elephant in the room. We haven't discussed it. We've only got 6 minutes, so I'm going to go around and give you both 2 minutes to answer. If I start with you, Shane, on the question of NAMA, and that some of the experts who are out there are being precluded from helping the country recover.
I'd keep them excluded. I would absolutely keep them excluded, because whereas I do blame the banks for a lot of what happened, and using the builders and the developers obviously pretty ruthlessly as a vehicle for their own greed, these guys who you call experts have a heavy responsibility because they got it wrong. And you say that they're expert, but they got it. Let me finish, you can come back. They got it badly wrong. They are partly responsible for what happened. And to be sending for them at this stage and say come back because you understand and you've experienced of the sites is really saying, look, we have nobody else who is capable of doing this work except for the people who've already failed the country and the nation, oversupplied, overborrowed, been guilty of all sorts of misjudgments, to be charitable. I think it's absurd. There are many, many other people who could do this job and could probably do it better. And I think the idea now that they should be rehabilitated, I don't mind about socially at all, if they haven't committed any crimes, but they should be rehabilitated when they have made such misjudgments which have caused such suffering, I think is totally and utterly unrealistic.
Okay.
And to reward them at this stage with 6-figure salaries, which is what NAMA is doing, I think is utterly crazy. And it would fly in the face of public opinion and of logic. Sorry.
Eamon?
My recollection, I'm going back here 7 years, and I remember the legislation and the drafting of it 6 years ago, was that there was provision to have existing developers involved in the process of managing out assets. I'm trying to remember whether there was a cap on that in terms of scale-wise, but it certainly wasn't precluded, as I recall, in the legislation. And I remember in the decision around the formation of NAMA, one of the reasons we went with the NAMA option was because we were left with the development industry. The UK went with an insurance type solution, and they did because they had a lot of public building companies that would have been able to recapitalise, whereas our assessment at the time is that the Irish developers were often operating just out of the kind of one man or one woman. They didn't have that public company ability to actually bring in capital again. I think if I can say, I think Brendan McDonough and Frank Daly, the other people in my mind, have done a good job. I think the problem you cite will in any case become to an end, as I understand it, in the next 2 years when NAMA is wound up, unless it has an ongoing financing side in the public housing area. But the main business of NAMA is going to be done within the next year or two. And I think that at least provides an opportunity for whoever had dealings with them, I would imagine, to start again. It's been a very, very difficult 7 years, but I don't know of an easier way we could have worked it out. I wouldn't have left it to the banks, and I wouldn't have left it to the developers. I think NAMA, by and large, have done the right thing.
Okay, for the last word, Hubert.
Yes, it has been a very difficult 7 or 8 years, and it's fair to say that the experience of developers within NAMA has been very, very mixed. Some have not gone on well in NAMA, maybe it's related to the extent of borrowings or the extent of the exposure. On the other hand, there are other developers who are proactively working with NAMA and are very positive about what NAMA has actually achieved And we must remember that there are a lot of houses actually being delivered around Dublin today by developers who are proactively working with NAMA. In fairness to NAMA, it is providing working capital of adequate proportions to a lot of developments within the Greater Dublin area. That is to be welcomed, and it remains to be seen what's going to happen in 2 years' time when NAMA decides that it is going to close up, and how that funding stream is going to be available from other sectors. I would question, is the banking sector able to replace NAMA at the current time in respect of current levels of activity and indeed planned levels of activity?
Thanks very much. I know it's a short conversation, but we've already overrun, so we're going to have to vacate and hand over to the next one. Thank you very much.